They buried an empty coffin for the Alpha King's bride. There was nothing inside it but a wedding cloak, gray wool with a red border, folded the way you fold a thing you never expect to shake out again, and 3 black feathers laid on top of the wool, so that everyone standing in the cold would know exactly who they were supposed to hate. The Alpha King did not weep at the graveside. When the diggers came forward with their shovels, he raised one hand, and the whole barrow field went still. "Leave it open," he said. They thought grief had taken his mind. It had not. He told them, in a voice that carried without ever once rising, that he would not close his wife's grave until there was something of her to put in it. He would not take another mate. He would not lift the blockade off the kettle, not for a season, not for a bad winter, not for a hungry town, not until the last hand that touched her had answered for it. 10 years. That is how long a man can hold a promise like that. And Soren Halvard was stubborn the way a headland is stubborn. Here is the part nobody could have planned. That blockade, the one he built out of grief, closed the little harbor town of Bellhaven like a fist. And one of the small things that stopped coming through was a gray paste the crows made out of ash and sea lavender. A woman who sold bread on Cormorant Street had worked that paste into her wrists and her throat every single morning for 10 years, without missing one, the way other people say their prayers. On the morning of the 10th memorial, her jar was empty. She went down to the market anyway, because a woman with a child to feed goes down to the market. And the wind came in off the water and turned up Cormorant Street, and the Alpha King, riding down through the fog to sign a peace he did not believe in, stopped his horse in the middle of the road like a man who had walked face first into a wall. He had buried her twice, once in the ground and once inside himself. Neither burial had taken. Chapter 1. The fog came into Bellhaven every morning off the kettle, and every morning the bell they called the Widow rang out over the water to tell the boats where the rocks were, and Nell was always awake before both of them. She lit the oven at 4, in the dark, by feel, because a lamp costs oil, and oil was dear now. The first heat came up off the brick and touched her face, and for a moment, as always, it was the best part of the whole day. Then she reached up to the shelf for the little clay jar, and her fingers came back gray with nothing. Empty, scraped down to the glaze. She thought, calmly, the way she had trained herself to think about everything. It is only a jar. Corbin will have more by the end of the week. And she stood there with her hands still on the shelf and understood that she had just told herself a lie, because Corbin had not gotten sea lavender past the harbor boom in 2 months. Nell wiped her fingers on her apron. Then she went back to the dough, because the dough does not care. Her daughter came down at 5:30 with her boots on the wrong feet. Aster was 9 years old and could not be still. She had her mother's dark red hair, which was the whole problem, and her father's eyes, which was a bigger one, a flat winter gray that did not belong to anybody on Cormorant Street. Nell kept the hair under a knitted cap and had told the child since she could walk to keep it there. Aster thought it was a game about lice. Nell let her think so. "Mama," Aster said, "there are 71 boats in the harbor. I counted them from the window. 11 of them are ours, and the rest are just sitting there because of the wolves." "We do not say because of the wolves," Nell said. "We say because of the war. It is shorter, and it makes fewer enemies. Get the trays." It was the 10th memorial. Every year on this day, the Northmarch pack came down off the headland to the barrow field above Stonewatch, and every year Nell stayed inside with the shutters closed and told her daughter it was a holy day for wolves and none of their business. This year, the Rook Court had agreed to talk. Crows and wolves were going to sit in the bell house on the harbor front and put their names to a truce, because a truce meant the boom came up and the boats came in and Bellhaven ate again. which meant that this year, for the first time in 10 years, the Alpha King would ride down into the town itself. Nell thought about that while she scored the loaves, with a very steady hand, because steady hands are the only thing a person can actually control. Here is the plain shape of it, she told herself, so that she would not be tempted to be brave and stupid. If that man learns that the woman who sells bread on Cormorant Street is the wife he buried, my daughter loses the only safe life she has ever had. That is the whole sum. Everything else is feelings. Then she loaded the barrow and took the bread down to the market like it was any Tuesday. The market ran along the wet stones under the bell house, and by 7 it was full, and Nell had her place at the end of the row where the ovens could do their work. Warden Bess Tanner, who kept Bellhaven's harbor law and had never in her life been bought, came by with the ledger under her arm, bought nothing at all, and stayed 20 minutes, which was her way of saying she liked you. They come down at 9, Bess said. Down Cormorant, along the front, into the bell house. You are pale. I am always pale, Nell said. It is the flour. Bess went off down the row. The fog began to lift off the kettle in long, torn sheets, the way it did when the wind was about to change, and Nell felt the first cold thread of it come up the street off the water and go straight through her. She put her hand to her own wrist without thinking. Bare skin, no ash, no sea lavender, nothing but flour and heat and 10 years of hiding standing out on her like a lamp in a window. Then she heard the horses. Chapter 2. 23 horses came down Cormorant Street, and Nell counted every one of them, because counting was the only thing that had ever kept her hands from shaking. The town went quiet in that particular way a town goes quiet when it is being careful. Nobody cheered, nobody spat. Bellhaven had lived 10 years between 2 courts by never once picking a side out loud. They came slow, gray horses, gray cloaks, and no drums, because he had never allowed drums. Nell kept her head down over her bread and thought, I do not have to look at him. I have gone 10 years without looking at him. She looked. He was in front, of course. Black hair with the gray come in at the left temple, gray like a knife laid flat, and a face she could have drawn in the dark. 37 years old now. She did the arithmetic before she could stop herself, and it landed in her stomach like a stone. He was not looking at anybody. Soren Halvard never scanned a crowd. He rode through it as though the crowd were weather. Then the wind came off the kettle and turned up the street. Nell felt it hit her back. She felt it lift the heat off the bread and the flour off her sleeves and carry the whole of it forward, past the fish stalls, past the ropes, up the road. The Alpha King stopped his horse. He did not stop the way a man stops. He stopped the way a man stops when the floor is gone. The animal went 3 more steps and came up short and shook its head, and the whole column behind him folded up in confusion, and Soren Halvard sat there in the middle of Cormorant Street with the reins slack in his hands and his head turned very slightly into the wind. He breathed in. Nell watched a man who had not shown anything in 10 years come apart in front of 400 people, and she thought, with perfect and useless calm, oh, there it is. That is that. Then she thought, move. She did not run. Running is what they look for. She crouched, slow, as if for a dropped roll, and said Aster in a voice she barely recognized, and the child came to her under the trestle at once. Take the barrow up the alley to Mrs. Trapp and stay there, Nell said. Do not go home. Do not take your cap off. Count to 500 and then count again. Mama, Aster said. Her small face had gone still. What did I do? Nothing, Nell said. You did nothing. Go. The child went, and the barrow wheel squeaked, and Nell straightened up behind her stall with her hands flat on the boards and made herself breathe. Out in the road, the Alpha King had dismounted. He came down the market row on foot. He did not draw anything. He did not shout. He walked with his head slightly lowered and slightly turned, the way a man walks in a dark house he used to live in, and every stall he passed went silent, and behind him his second, a gray-bearded man named Garrick, said his name over and over and was completely ignored. Then he came to the end of the row where the oven's warmth was, and he stood in front of a bread seller with flour to her elbows and a scarf over her hair, and he looked at her. Nell had thought about this moment for 10 years, and in every version of it he knew her instantly, and in every version she was ready. He did not know her. That was the part that nearly broke her. She had cut her hair off the winter Aster was born and never grown it out. She had a burn scar up the inside of her right forearm from an oven door and a bakery on her hands, and 10 years of a different life in her face. And Soren Halvard looked straight at her and saw a stranger. But he stood there anyway, far too long, breathing like a man doing arithmetic that would not come out. "Your bread," he said. His voice went through her like cold water down a back. "It is only bread, my lord," Nell said. "Barley and rye. There is no white flour in this town, and has not been since the boom went up." Something moved behind his eyes at that. She had not meant it as a hit. It landed as one. "What do you put in it?" he said. "Salt," Nell said. "Water. Sourdough I have kept alive 9 years. Nothing that would interest a king." He picked up a loaf and did not look at it, and his hand was not entirely steady, and Nell thought, if he lifts that to his face, I am finished, and my daughter is finished with me. He set it back down. "I will take 4, he said. Nell wrapped 4 loaves in cloth, slowly, because slow hands do not tremble. She did not breathe through her nose. She kept her chin down and her eyes on the knot. 2 pennies, my lord, she said. Garrick paid. Soren Halvard did not move. "What is your name?" he said. And Nell, who had made her whole life out of small, ordinary answers, gave him one more. "Nell, my lord," she said. "I sell bread." He held that for 3 full seconds. Then he said, very quietly, more to himself than to her, "I am sorry. I thought you were someone else." He turned and went back to his horse. Nell waited until the horses were round the corner. Then she was quietly sick into the gutter behind the fish stalls, with one hand braced on the wall, and Mrs. Trapp came and held her scarf back and said nothing at all, which was the kindest thing anybody did for her that whole year. Chapter 3. By dark, the fog had come back in so thick that the widow rang every 2 minutes, and Nell had bolted the shop door for the first time since the winter of the bad tide. Corbin Vass came in through the yard window at 9, because Corbin had never in his life used a door when a window was available, and stood dripping in the middle of the kitchen with his coat steaming. He was a crow, and he looked it. Black hair, black eyes, thin as a whip, one finger on his left hand set crooked from a break that had never been pulled straight. He had a wife named Tilly, and twin sons, and a laugh you could hear across the harbor. And tonight he was not laughing. "He has had men in the market since noon," Corbin said. "Not soldiers, trackers." "Then I will not be in the market," Nell said. "I will send Mrs. Trapp with the trays and keep my daughter off the front street until the 9th day, when the truce is signed and they all go home and Bellhaven goes back to being nobody's business." "It is 9 days, Corbin. I have hidden for 3,652. She had not meant to say the number. It came out of her the way the counting always came out of her. Corbin sat down slowly on the bread bench. 10 years ago, I pulled a half-drowned woman out of a bilge under Tallow Wharf because I heard her tapping on the hull, he said. And she would not tell me her name, and I did not ask, and I have not asked since. I am going to break that once, tonight. That man stopped his horse in the road today like he had been shot. There is one woman on this coast who could do that to Soren Halvard, and they put her in the ground 10 years ago with nothing in the box." Nell looked at her daughter, sitting on the flour bin with her knees under her chin, watching them both with her father's gray eyes and saying nothing. "Aster," Nell said, "upstairs. Take the candle." The child went, and a door shut, and the kitchen was very quiet except for the widow out on the water, ringing every 2 minutes, telling the boats where the rocks were. "Elowen," Nell said. It came out of her mouth strangely, like a word in a language she used to speak. She had not said it aloud since before her daughter was born. Elowen Rask. And after that, Elowen Halvard, for 101 days, which is how long I was that man's wife before somebody took me off the seawall in the dark. Corbin Vask put both hands over his face. "Then walk up that hill tonight," he said. "Knock on that gate and say your name and end this. He would burn the world for you. He has spent 10 years trying." And that, Nell thought, is where every conversation like this one has always gone, and it is why I have never had one. She went to the dresser and took out the tin from under the salt, and out of the tin a piece of folded parchment gone soft as cloth at the creases, and set it on the table in front of him. "Read it," she said. Corbin read it. She knew every word by heart. She had read it in a cellar by one candle, and on a fishing boat in the rain, and in the back of a bakery with a newborn on her shoulder at 3 a.m, until the words stopped meaning anything and became a kind of weather she lived in. By the hand and seal of Soren Halvard, Alpha of the Northmarch. The woman Elowen Rask is to be taken from the sea wall at Bellhaven on the eve of the harvest and held, and if the Rook Court does not answer for her within the season, she is to be put into the kettle with weight on her, and the birds are to be blamed for it, so that the North will have its war. Corbin Vask read it twice. Then he looked up, and his face had gone the color of ash. "There is a seal," he said. "There is his seal," Nell said, "in his own wax. And the man who put it into my hands in that cellar told me to keep it, because his master wanted me to know exactly who had bought me. He said it was more use to him if I understood." She took the parchment back and folded it along its soft old creases. "So you can stop telling me to walk up that hill," Nell said. "I do not hide from that man because I am a coward, Corbin. I hide from him because I read what he wrote about the weight and the water, and then I found out I was carrying his child, and I made the only choice a person can make with those two facts in the same room." Then someone knocked at the shop door. Not the yard door, the front. 3 knocks, unhurried. The sort of knock that has all night. Nell looked at Corbin. Corbin looked at the window. "Who is that?" he mouthed. Nell did not answer, because she already knew, in a way she had not let her body speak in 10 years. Nobody in Bellhaven knocked like that. Nobody in Bellhaven knocked at all. She wiped the flour off her hands, very carefully, one finger at a time. Then she went and opened the door. Chapter 4. She opened the door on the fog, and the fog had a king in it. He had come alone. No horse, no guard, no chain of office, nothing but a wet gray cloak and the smell of the sea on him. He filled the doorway the way weather fills a doorway. Behind her, Nell heard Corbin Vask go absolutely silent, which for Corbin was a kind of scream. "We are shut," Nell said. "I know," Soren Halvard said. "I bought 4 loaves from you this morning. My second overpaid you, and you did not correct him. I have thought about that for 11 hours. You are the only person in this town who would have corrected him." "That is a great deal of thinking about bread, my lord," Nell said. "May I come in?" he said. "No," Nell said. And here's the thing she had not been ready for, the thing that undid 10 years of careful planning in 1 second. because she had planned for a man who forced doors. He stepped back. He stepped back off her step into the wet and stood there in the road with his hands open at his sides and said very evenly, "Then I will stand here." "You will get soaked," Nell said. "I have been soaked," he said. She should have shut the door. She stood there instead, gripping the wood, watching the water run off the ends of his hair, and something in her chest that she had put to sleep 10 years ago rolled over. "My lord," she said, "go back up the hill." "I will ask you one question," he said. "Then I will go wherever you tell me." "Ask it then," Nell said, because she was tired, and because you cannot brace forever. Soren Halvard looked at her, and for the first time he did not look like a king. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in a decade. "My wife had a scar," he said. "Under the left ear, along the jaw, no longer than a thumbnail. She got it going over a wall she had been told not to go over, and she was proud of it, and she used to turn her head to show it to people when she wanted to seem dangerous. Nobody outside my house ever knew it was there. It is not in a single song." Nell did not move. "I do not need to see it," he said. "I need you to tell me whether I have lost my mind. Because this morning I smelled bread on a street in Bellhaven, and I have not been able to hear anything since." The fog came between them in a slow, torn sheet, and Nell understood, standing there, that he was not asking in order to trap her. He was asking because he could not carry it. If she said no, he would go back up that hill and believe her, and never come back, and she would be safe, and that would be the end of it. She thought about her daughter upstairs with the candle. She thought about a folded parchment in a tin under the salt, and the words about weight and water. Then she reached up with 2 fingers and pushed her scarf back off her jaw and turned her head the way she used to when she wanted to seem dangerous. The Alpha King made a sound she had never heard a man make. He went down. Not gracefully, and not all the way, but his knee found the wet stone of her step and stayed there, and he put one hand flat against the doorframe as though the street had tilted. "Elowen," he said. It was not a greeting. It was the sound of a man testing whether his own voice still worked. "Get up," Nell said. Her own voice came out in pieces. "Get up off my step. There are 11 windows on this street." He got up. He was shaking. She could see it in the cloak. "You were alive," he said. "Every day, all of it, you were alive." "Yes," she said. He said, "Why?" And Nell Rask, who had rehearsed 1,000 answers to that question in 1,000 sleepless hours, found that she had exactly one left. "Because you signed the order," she said. Chapter 5. He did not shout. That was the first thing she noticed, and it made her angrier than shouting would have. "I signed nothing," Soren Halvard said. "Then you will not mind me keeping my door between us," Nell said, and shut it. Corbin Vask said, from the bench, in a very small voice, "Nell, he is still out there." "He can be out there," Nell said. "He stayed out there all night." She knew, because she checked at midnight, and at 2, and at 4:30 when she came down to light the oven. He had moved as far as the opposite wall, and sat down in the road, like a dog outside a house it used to belong to, and the fog beat it on him, and he did not knock again. At 5 she opened the shutter, put a hot loaf on the sill, and closed it. It was gone by morning. That was how the strangest week in Bellhaven's history began, and the town enjoyed it far more than Nell did. The Alpha King of the Northmarch came to the bakery every morning at 6, bought bread, sat on the bench outside in the wet and ate it, and then stayed. He did not come in unless she opened the door. He did not touch her. He did not once say her name where anyone could hear it. By the 3rd day, Half the town was finding reasons to walk down Cormorant Street. "You are frightening my customers," Nell said on the fourth morning, with her arms folded. "Your customers have doubled," Soren Halvard said. "I counted." "You counted?" Nell said. "You taught me," he said. She went back inside and burned a whole tray of rolls, which she had not done since she was 17. On the sixth day, he said, "Will you let me ask about the child?" Nell stopped in the doorway with the tray in her hands. She had known this was coming. A 9-year-old cannot be kept upstairs for 5 days. "There is no child," Nell said. "There is a child," he said, still looking at the road, not at her. "She is 9 or 10. She has red hair she keeps under a cap, and she counts the boats out of the upstairs window every morning out loud and gets to 71. Nell's hands were entirely steady on the tray. She noticed that in a distant way, the way you notice weather. "I am not asking you to tell me anything," he said. "I am telling you that I am not blind, and that I have not said one word about it to one living soul, and that I will not, ever, whatever you decide. I wanted you to hear that from me and not to wonder." He stood up and put his pennies on the sill. "Elowen," he said very quietly, so that only she could hear it. "Whatever you think I signed. If you will show it to me, I will not defend myself. I will only read it." Then he walked away down Cormorant Street in the fog, with his bread under his arm, like any man in the town. Nell stood in her doorway with the tray going cold in her hands, and thought, with real despair, "This is worse. This is so much worse than if he had dragged me up that hill. Because a man who drags you gives you something to fight." Chapter 6. The parley opened on the 7th day, and all of Bellhaven crowded the harbor front to watch the birds come in. The rook court came across the kettle in 9 long black boats out of the fog, and the crows came off the rocks above the town in a cloud that turned the morning gray. Then they were people, walking up the wet stones in feathered coats, and at the head of them came a small, bent woman with white hair and eyes like 2 chips of coal, leaning on a stick, refusing every arm offered to her. Mother Halla of the Rook Court. Nell had met her exactly once, 10 years ago, in a cliff room that smelled of tallow, and had lied to her about her name, and had asked her for a thing no sensible woman asks for. She kept well back in the crowd. The bell house stood on the harbor front, with the widow hanging in its tower, and by the old harbor law of Bellhaven, nobody carried a weapon inside it, and nobody's law ran in it but the town's. Warden Bess Tanner stood on the step and made a wolf king and a rook mother both hand their blades to a woman in a wool coat, and did it without blinking. And beside her on the step, smiling, holding the great brass chain of 9 keys that every harbor master of Bellhaven had worn since the town had a harbor, stood Osric Blane. Nell had never liked him, and had never been able to say why, and had felt vaguely ashamed of it for 10 years, because Osric Blane was the most obliging man on the northern coast. Past 50, thin, fair hair gone gray, pale blue eyes, and he remembered the name of every child in Bellhaven. He never raised his voice. When the boom went up and the trade died, it was Blane's Tide Company that held the one license to move grain and iron through the blockade under wolf protection, and Blane who fed the town on it, at a price, and never once let anybody forget it was a kindness. They talked for 2 days, and what came out of it was a paper. The blockade would come up, the Northmarch would pay for the boats it had burned, and on the 9th day, in the bell house, in front of the whole town, the Alpha King and the Rook Mother would put their names and their seals to it, and 10 years of war would be over. The town went half mad with relief. Nell did not. She stood in her kitchen on the 8th night with the fog rolling up Cormorant Street, and she laid the whole thing out flat in her own head, in plain words, the way she made herself do with anything frightening. Somebody took me off that seawall. Somebody had a king's writ made with a king's seal on it and put it into my hands on purpose so that I would believe it, and made a whole coast go to war over a woman who never died. And somebody has spent 10 years living in the same town as me. She had never let herself get that far before. In 10 years, she had never once gone past the parchment, because the parchment had a name on it, and the name explained everything, and you do not dig under a stone you have already decided is the bottom. But a man had sat in the rain outside her door for 6 days and had not once asked her to believe him. Nell went to the dresser and took the tin out from under the salt. Then she called up the stairs, "Aster, put your boots on, we are going out." "Where?" said her daughter, delighted, because they never went out at night. "Up the hill," Nell said. Chapter 7. They did not go all the way up the hill. Nell got as far as the Chandler's Corner and found the Alpha King already coming down it, because of course he was. He stopped dead when he saw who was holding her hand. Aster looked up at him with her cap crooked and her father's gray eyes and said, "You are the wolf who sits outside our shop. You eat a lot of bread." "I do," Soren Halvard said. "Not here," Nell said, in a voice that came out harder than she meant. "Somewhere with a door." He took them to the bell house, where Bess Tanner was sitting in the front room with a lamp, and let them into the small side chamber without asking one question, which Nell would remember for the rest of her life. Aster was given a lamp and a stack of harbor tallies to count, and was instantly, entirely happy. Nell shut the inner door and put the folded parchment down on the table between them. "You said you would only read it," she said. Soren Halvard unfolded it with 2 fingers, the way a man handles something that might be a snake, and read it. And Nell made herself watch his face, because she had earned that at least. She saw the moment he reached the part about the weight and the water. He did not go pale. He went still, the way a hunting animal goes still. And he read it again from the top, and then set it down flat, and put both hands on the table on either side of it, and did not speak for a long time. "That is a copy of my scribe's hand," he said at last. "And that is the wording I would have used. Not the order, the wording. Held and answered for within the season. That is how I write." "I know," Nell said. "That is why I never doubted it." He turned the parchment around and pushed it back across the table towards her. "Elowen," he said. "Look at the wolf." Nell looked at the wolf. It was pressed in dark red wax at the foot of the page. A wolf, standing with its head turned back over its shoulder. And it was so familiar to her that it had stopped being an image years ago and become a kind of bruise. "Which way is it facing?" he said. "Left," Nell said. Soren Halvard drew a chain out from under his collar. On it was the seal ring of the Northmarch, worn thin at the edges, and he laid it on the table beside the parchment with the face of it turned up. Nell leaned in with the lamp. The wolf on the ring stood with its head turned back over its shoulder, exactly as on the wax. It faced right. Nell sat back. She heard herself make a small sound. "A seal cuts backwards," Soren Halvard said. "That is the whole trick of it. The wolf on my ring faces right, so that the wolf in the wax comes out facing left. Every true seal of the Northmarch for 400 years has come out of the wax facing left. So has that one." "Then it is real," Nell said. Her voice had gone thin. "No," he said. "It is facing left, because somebody took a true impression off a letter I had sealed, cast a brass mold from it, and pressed the wax out of the mold. A mold turns it backwards a second time. They never understood they had reversed it twice." "Elowen, that is not my ring in that wax. That is a copy of a copy, and it has been sitting in your kitchen for 10 years, telling you I wanted you drowned." The lamp hissed. Out in the front room, Nell's daughter counted the harbor tallies out loud, got to 40, and started again. and Nell Rask, who had built an entire life on top of one piece of paper, felt the whole thing go out from under her, like a stair that was never there. Chapter 8. She got up and stood with her back to him and her hand over her mouth, and she did not cry, because she had not cried in front of anybody since she was 23 years old and had no intention of starting. 10 years, she said, into her hand. I know, he said. I put the bond to sleep, Nell said. Behind her, she heard him stand. She turned around and made herself say the rest of it out loud, because he had earned that too. There is a right the Rook Court keeps, Nell said, for wolf-blooded women who marry in and get widowed. A mate bond does not let go. It goes on pulling at nothing until it pulls you apart. They put it to sleep. Mother Hala did it for me in a room on the Nine Sisters, and I gave her a false name, and she never knew who she had in front of her. She told me only the one who asks for it can wake it, and that it would cost me. I said do it anyway. That is why you felt me die, Nell said. On the 9th day of the deep winter, 10 years ago, in the afternoon. You felt something on the end of that bond stop. The Alpha King's face did a thing she had never seen it do. I was in the stable yard, he said. I went down in the mud in front of 40 men. I had looked for you for 4 months by then, and I would not let them dig a grave. And after that afternoon, I let them. 3 days later, I put your cloak in a box and would not let them close the hole. I am sorry, Nell said. Do not, he said, and his voice cracked straight across the middle of it. Do not you dare say that to me. You did it to stay alive, because a piece of paper with my name on it told you to. He put the heel of his hand against his eyes. I hunted the wrong people for 10 years, he said. I starved this town for 10 years. I sat on those rocks with the boom up and told myself it was justice. And the whole time, the man who took you was somewhere warm, watching me do it. Soren Halvard took his hand down. We will find him, he said. No, Nell said, and she felt something come up in her that she had not felt in 10 years, and it was not fear, it was the other thing. I will find him. You have had 10 years and an army, and you found nothing, because somebody sat you down and pointed you north at the birds. I was in that cellar. I am the only living person who was in that room. I have a very good memory, and I have never in my life been able to stop counting things. She came back to the table and put both hands on it. I want you to understand something, my lord, she said. I am not coming back up that hill to be looked after. I did not ask you to, Soren Halvard said. You have not asked me for anything, Nell said. That is the most infuriating part of you. And then, because she was 33 years old and had been holding herself together with flour and arithmetic since she was 23, and because he was standing there with his eyes wet and his hands open and no argument in him at all, Nell crossed the last of the floor and took a fistful of his wet collar and pulled him down and kissed him. It was not a young thing. It was slower than that, and worse, and better. He made a low, broken sound into her mouth, and his hands came up and hovered and did not land, as if he did not have permission, until she took one of his wrists and put it where she wanted it, at the small of her back, and then he held onto her like a man holding onto a rail. They stood in the lamplight in a small stone room on a harbor front, breathing each other, 10 years late. When she pulled back, his forehead came down against hers and stayed there. Say it again, he said, barely out loud. Say what? Nell said. Anything, he said, in my ear. I have been asleep for 10 years. There are 71 boats in this harbor, Nell said, and 11 of them are ours. The Alpha King of the Northmarch laughed once, wrecked into her hair. In the next room, her daughter reached 100 and announced it to nobody. Chapter 9. She did not go up the hill that night, and he did not ask her to. That was becoming the shape of them. What they did instead, at 11 at night, was go and wake a wax caster. Master Pell had a shop 3 doors up from the chandler's, and had made every candle and every seal in Bellhaven for 40 years. He came to the door in his nightshirt, and went the color of tallow when he saw who was standing behind Nell Rask. She did not let Soren speak. She had told him in the street, flatly, that a frightened man tells a king what the king wants to hear, and tells his baker the truth. And the Alpha King had stood back against the wall with his arms folded like a piece of furniture. Nell put the parchment on the counter. Pell looked at it for less than 3 seconds and sat down on a barrel. "I cast that," he said. 10 years back, in the autumn. A gentleman brought me a treaty page with the Northmarch seal on it, whole and clean, and asked for a brass mold off it, and paid me 9 crowns, which was 4 years of my living. He said it was for a memorial plate, and I did not want to not believe him. "Master Pell," Nell said, "there is a paper being signed in the bell house tomorrow that puts the boom down and brings the boats in. My daughter has never eaten white bread." "Who paid you 9 crowns? "Osric Blane," Master Pell said, into his hands, "the harbor master." And Nell stood in a wax shop at midnight, with the smell of tallow all around her, and felt 10 years rearrange themselves behind her eyes, like a wall coming down in order. She thought about a cellar with cold running under the floor, and the tide coming up twice a day so close beneath her that she could hear it work, and a grain hoist over her head that ran for an hour every morning and never on the 7th day. She thought about the widow ringing in the fog, close enough to shake the dust off the stone. She had spent 10 years believing she had been carried north to the rocks of the 9 Sisters. She had never left Bellhaven at all. She had been under Tallow Wharf, 400 paces from her own future front door, and the harbor master had walked over her head twice a day for 122 days. Behind her, Soren Halvard came off the wall. "Elowen," he said. "Not tonight," Nell said. "Not with an army. Not with anything that makes a noise. If we go at him tonight, he burns the long store and every ledger in it, and stands on the step tomorrow morning being kind at us. And there is not a court on this coast that will take a wax caster's word over a harbor master's chain." "Then what?" Soren Halvard said. Nell folded her parchment along its soft old creases. "Then in the morning, I go and get the only thing he cannot burn," she said. And she went home and slept 4 hours, and dreamed, for the first time in 10 years, of scratching a tally into stone with a bent nail. Chapter 10. Tallow Wharf smelled of tar and old grain, and the long store stood at the end of it, the biggest bonded warehouse on the northern coast, with the Tide Company's mark on every door. Nell went at 6 in the morning with a bread barrow, because a woman with a bread barrow can go anywhere in a harbor town, and with Corbin Vask on the roof, because a crow can go anywhere at all. The underfloor was reached by a hatch behind the grain hoist. Nell knew where that hatch was the moment she was inside the building, and that frightened her more than the hatch did, because she had never once been in that building in her life, and her body walked her to it anyway. She went down the ladder with a lamp. It was 1 room, stone curved at the end with a drain and a bench and a ring in the wall, and the tide moving under the floor with a sound like a big animal breathing in its sleep. Nell stood at the bottom of the ladder and let it happen. It took about a minute. Then it was over, and she was still standing, and she wiped her face with her sleeve and got to work. The tally was in the corner behind where the bench had been, scratched into the mortar with a bent nail. 122 marks in 11 rows, and a short row of 2. Under it, cut deeper than the rest because she had spent a whole night on it, was a wolf with its head turned back over its shoulder, facing right. She had scratched it from memory off her husband's ring, and gotten it right, and then spent 10 years looking at a wolf in red wax facing the other way. Then she took the mason's chisel out of the bread barrow. It took an hour and a half. Corbin came down and helped with the last of it, swearing steadily in the crow tongue, and between them they got the block out whole, Tally and Wolf together. 30 pounds of Bellhaven mortar and stone, and up the ladder in a flour sack and out onto the wharf under a load of loaves. They were 40 paces from the door when Osric Blane came around the corner with his chain of 9 keys and 2 men behind him. "Good morning, Nell," he said in that mild, pleasant voice. "You are a long way from Cormorant Street." "Ship's order," Nell said. 80 loaves for the kettle boats." Blane looked at the barrow. He looked at the flour sack. He looked at the door of his own warehouse standing open behind her, and then he looked at her face for slightly too long, the way a man looks at a coin he has just realized is the wrong weight. And Nell watched him work it out. She saw 10 years of small, careful arithmetic finish itself behind those pale blue eyes, and she understood that he was no longer looking at the baker on Cormorant Street. He was looking at a woman his men had reported drowned. He smiled at her. It was a perfectly kind smile. "Give my regards to your little one," Osric Blane said. "Aster, is it not? 9 years old. Such a counter, that one." Then he stood aside and let her pass, and Nell walked the whole length of Tallow Wharf with her back to him and her hands steady on the barrow, thinking in plain words so that she would not panic. He knows. He will not send for the law because the law here is best tanner, and best tanner cannot be bought. He will send men to my house, today, for the sack and for the child, and he will do it kindly, and he will have a reason ready. She was right about all of it except the timing. They were already there. Chapter 11. There were 4 of them in the road outside the bakery when she came up Cormorant Street, and one of them had her daughter by the arm. Tide Company men in Tide Company coats, and the one holding Aster was saying something about a debt writ and the harbor master's office in a reasonable voice to Mrs. Trapp, who was standing in her doorway with a coal shovel and telling him exactly what she thought of it. Nell dropped the barrow handles. She did not scream. She said very clearly from 30 paces, "Take your hand off my daughter." And Aster, who was 9, and who had spent her whole life being told to keep her cap on, and never once told why, looked up the street at her mother's face and understood something. Then the child came apart out of her own coat. Nell had thought about this 1,000 times, and had always thought it would come at 12 or 13, quietly, upstairs, with her holding on. It came instead in the middle of Cormorant Street at 8 in the morning in front of 40 people, fast and loud and entirely wrong-footed. And where a 9-year-old had been, there was suddenly a young red wolf with winter-gray eyes standing in a heap of cap and coat, snarling like a kettle. The Tide Company man fell over backwards into the gutter. Bellhaven went completely silent. Nell walked up the street through it. She got down on the wet stones in her flour apron and put her arms around her daughter's neck and her mouth against her ear. "You are all right," Nell said. "You are mine. You are exactly what you were meant to be, and you have gone and done it in front of the whole street, and I have never been prouder of anybody in my life. Now breathe. Count with me. 1. The wolf shook. The wolf counted in its way. At 11, there was a child in her arms again, shaking and crying, and Nell wrapped her in her own apron and picked her up, 9 years old and far too big to be carried, and carried her anyway. When she turned around, the Alpha King was standing at the top of Cormorant Street. He had come at a dead run from the harbor front, in front of half the Rook Court and his own guard, and stopped 20 paces off, looking at a red-haired child with gray eyes wrapped in a baker's apron. Nobody in that street moved. Soren Halvard came forward 3 steps and went down on one knee on the stones. He did not do it to her. That was the thing the whole town understood, and the thing they talked about in Bellhaven for the next 40 years. He went down so that he was lower than the child, and he stayed there, and he said, in a voice that carried the length of the street without ever rising, "Aster of the Northmarch." I am your father. I have been 10 years late, and it was not your mother's fault, and it was not yours. If you want nothing to do with me, I will go back up that hill, and I will still put the boom down, because your town is hungry, and that is owed whatever you decide." Aster lifted her face out of her mother's neck. "Are you really?" she said. "I am," he said. "Do you count?" said Aster. The Alpha King of the Northmarch laughed, and it broke in the middle. "Badly," he said. "Your mother is much better at it." That night, the long store burned to the waterline. It went up at 1 a.m. with the wind off the kettle behind it, and every ledger and every wax mold in it went with it. And Osric Blane stood on Tallow Wharf in his nightshirt, with his chain of 9 keys around his neck, and wept in front of witnesses for the ruin of his family's business. Nell watched it burn from the top of Cormorant Street, with a 30-pound block of stone sitting on her kitchen table behind her. "He is fast," she said. "He is finished," Corbin said. "He has nothing now." "He has tomorrow," Nell said. And then she went cold all over in the orange light, because she had just heard something. Down among the crowd on the wharf, a man was calling for buckets. He had a voice that whistled slightly on the letter S, through a gap where a tooth had been, and Nell had heard that voice say good morning to her through a hatch in a floor every day for 122 days. Chapter 12. The 9th morning came up clear for the first time in a month, which Nell took as very bad news, because fog would have kept people at home. The Bell House filled by 9, the Rook Court on the left, the Northmarch on the right, the town packed in behind and out into the road, the treaty on the long table with 2 inkhorns and 2 sticks of wax, and the widow hanging silent in her tower over all of it. Nell stood at the back by the tower stair, with her daughter's hand in hers, and went through it one more time in plain words, because saying a thing plainly is the only way to keep hold of it. If that paper is signed, the boom comes up and the boats come in and the war is over. If it fails today, it does not start again in 10 years. It starts again this afternoon, and this time nobody will ever stop it. And the man who started the first one is standing on the step in a brass chain, smiling at everybody, because peace ruins him. She had gone to Bess Tanner at 6 that morning with the block of stone and the parchment and the wax caster. Bess Tanner had listened without once interrupting, which is a rare and holy thing, and then had said, "I believe you now, and it is not enough." A wax caster who took a bribe, a stone with scratches on it, and a woman who has lived under a false name for 10 years. Blane will have that pulled apart before noon. Give me one living man who was in that cellar, and I will put the harbor master in irons on his own wharf. So Nell had spent 3 hours in a crowd of 900 people listening for a whistle on the letter S. She found him at 10:10. He was standing against the north wall in a Tide Company coat, a big, soft, moving man of about 50, with a gap in his teeth, and he had a bundle under his arm, wrapped in sacking, about the length of a forearm, and he was working his way, without hurry, along the wall towards the end of the table where the Rook Mother would sit. Nell watched him for 11 seconds. She thought about the sacking and the length of it, and the fact that Bess Tanner had taken every blade in the room at the door. She thought about what happens to a truce if the Rook Mother of the 9 sisters dies at a wolf table on the day of the signing, in front of 900 witnesses, with wolves on every side of her. Then she thought, with a clarity that felt almost restful, he does not need to succeed. He only needs to be seen trying. She could not shout, because the moment anybody cried out, he would simply do it faster. She could not reach the Alpha King at the far end of the hall, and there were 60 people between her and the Rook Mother. What she could reach, 4 steps to her left, unguarded because it had never in 400 years needed guarding, was the tower stair. Nell let go of her daughter's hand. "Stay with Corbin," she said, and went up. 61 steps. She counted them. The widow hung in the open tower, with the harbor spread out flat and bright below, and the rope came down through the floor in a loop, worn shiny by 200 years of hands. There is one law in Bellhaven, older than the Bell House, older than the harbor law, older than the Northmarch. Every child in the town learns it before they learn their letters. 2 strokes on the widow is fog, 1 long stroke is the tide, and 3 long strokes is a ship on the rocks in the kettle. And when the widow says 3 long, every living soul in Bellhaven goes to the seawall. The Bell House empties, the market empties, the ale house empties, and you go, because 140 years ago, the town lost 11 boats in one night while people finished their dinners. Nell Rask put both hands on the rope. She thought, "They will never forgive me for this if I am wrong." Then she thought about a whistle on the letters through a hatch in a floor, and she pulled. The first stroke went out over the harbor and stopped the Bell House dead. The second stroke emptied the stairs. By the third stroke, 900 people were moving as one animal towards the water, and Warden Bess Tanner was in the doorway roaring at them to go, and the rook mother of the 9 sisters was being carried bodily out of the building by 4 crows who did not stop to ask anybody's opinion. Nell came down the 61 steps into a hall with 9 people left in it. Bess Tanner in the doorway, Corbin Vask with Aster behind him on the stair, the Alpha King and Garrick halfway down the room and not moving because Soren Halvard had turned when the bell went and had seen his wife's hands on the rope through the floor grating and had understood instantly that his wife did not panic. And standing alone in the middle of an empty stone hall, in a Tide Company coat, with the sacking half off in his hand and 11 inches of Northmarch steel showing, one big, soft man of about 50 with a gap in his teeth. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Nell walked out into the middle of the floor towards him and stopped 6 feet away and said, "Good morning." The man went white. "Say it back," Nell said. "You said it to me every day for 122 days through a hatch in a floor under Tallow Wharf. You put the bowl down on the 3rd step and you said, 'Good morning,' and you went away. Say it back to me." The knife came down. "Good morning," said Tamkal. The whistle on the letter S went round that stone hall like a stone dropped in a well. Bess Tanner said from the doorway, in the flat voice of a woman writing in a ledger, "Wolfsteel, in my bell house, 6 feet from where the rook mother sits." And out on the harbor front, 900 people who had run to the seawall and found no ship on the rocks were already turning round and coming back to find out what the bell had really been for. Nell turned and looked at the doorway, where Osric Blane stood on his own step with his chain of 9 keys, having been carried back by the crowd, having had no choice, having nowhere left to be. She raised her voice for the first time in 10 years. "Bellhaven," Nell said. "My name is Elowen Rask. I have sold you bread for 10 years. Come inside. I am going to show you what the harbor master keeps under his floor." They came inside. They came in wet and angry about the bell, 900 of them, and stopped being angry very quickly because Warden Bess Tanner had Tam Cull on a bench with a piece of wolf steel on the table in front of him and a scribe at his elbow. Nell put the block of stone on the treaty table in front of the 2 inkhorns and turned it so the town could see. She did not make a speech. She had never in her life been able to make a speech. She said, "This came out of the floor under the long store yesterday morning. There are 122 marks on it. I cut them with a bent nail, 1 a day, from the eve of the harvest 10 years ago. And that is a wolf of the Northmarch facing right, which is how it sits on the ring and never how it sits in the wax. If you want to know why that matters, ask Master Pell, who is standing at the back and has something to tell you about 9 crowns. Then she sat down because her legs had stopped agreeing with her. Tam Cull talked for 2 hours, badly, in pieces, in a voice that whistled, and by the end of the first hour he had stopped defending himself and was simply emptying out. He named the hatch and the bowl and the 3 steps. He named the boat that was meant to take her into the kettle with weight on her and did not, because he could not do it, and because a crow came down the hull that night, and he let it happen and reported her drowned. He named the wax and the 9 crowns and the treaty page the mold was taken from, and the counting-house clerk who copied the scribe's hand. And he named the reason, which was the only part of it the town could not forgive. There was no reason. No old wound, no feud, no blood debt, nothing that could be dressed up. There was a license. During a war, and only during a war, one bonded company held the sole right to move grain and iron and salt through a blockaded strait under the king's protection. For 10 years that company had been the Tide Company, and Osric Blane had been the richest man on the northern coast, and the whole of it had cost him 9 crowns and a woman off a seawall. Bellhaven had buried 406 people in that war. Warden Bess Tanner took the brass chain of 9 keys off Osric Blane's neck herself, in front of everybody, and did not say one word while she did it. He did not shout either. He asked, mildly, whether he might be tried in his own town. "You will be," Bess Tanner said. "That is the worst thing I can do to you." The Alpha King of the Northmarch stood 4 paces away, with his hands at his sides, and let the town take him. He could have had Blane on the wharf in 10 seconds, and nobody would have stopped him. Instead, he asked Bess Tanner, formally, in front of the Rook Court, whether the Northmarch might be permitted to give evidence, and everybody in that hall understood exactly what had changed. The treaty was signed at 5 that afternoon, on the same table, with the block of stone still sitting on it, because nobody could think of a good reason to move it. The Rook Mother of the 9 sisters put her hand to the paper first. Then Soren Halvard put his ring in the wax, and the wolf came out facing left, and Nell watched it and felt something let go in her chest that had been holding on since she was 23. The boom came up at dawn. 22 boats came into Bellhaven harbor on the first tide, and Aster counted every one of them out loud from the upstairs window. Mother Halla came to the bakery before she went home to the rocks. She stood in the middle of the kitchen with her stick and her coal-black eyes and looked at Nell for a long time. "You lied to me," the Rook Mother said. "I did," Nell said. "You were a widow with a dead bond and no name," Halla said, "and I have wondered about you for 10 years. She tapped the flagstone with her stick. "Wake it then. It will hurt. 10 years comes at once, and there is no gentle way to take that. But you are the only one who can, and a sleeping bond in a living woman is a stone in a shoe, and you have a long walk ahead of you." They did it that night, in the back room, with the shutters closed. It hurt exactly as much as the Rook Mother said it would. Nell went to her knees on her own kitchen floor, and Soren Halvard went down with her and held on and did not let go. And for a few minutes there was nothing in the world but a sound like a bell struck underwater. Then it was through, and it was open, and 10 years came down that line in one breath. She felt every day of it. The stable yard in the mud, the open grave, the empty side of a bed on the headland for 10 winters. And he felt hers, which was worse, because hers had bread in it, and a child, and a life. When she could speak again, Nell said, into his shoulder, "You never once shut it, from your side. 10 years, and you never shut it." No, Soren said. Why? Nell said. In case, he said. And that, Nell thought, is a man. Right there. That is the whole of him, in 2 words. He asked her 3 days later, in the market, on a Tuesday, in front of the fish stalls, which she had absolutely not been warned about. He did not ask her to come back. That was the thing that undid her. He said, in front of 40 people who were all pretending to buy fish, that he had had a wife for 101 days and had not deserved a single one of them, and that he was not asking for her back because she had never been his to be given back. He said he would like to start at the beginning, like a man in a town with no crown on, and that he was prepared to buy bread every morning for as long as it took, and that at 4 loaves a day, this came to something over 1,400 loaves a year, and he had the money. You counted, Nell said. I counted, Soren said. She came round the trestle and took a fistful of his collar for the 2nd time in her life, and Mrs. Trapp dropped an entire crate of turnips, and Bellhaven has never stopped talking about it. They filled in the grave that autumn. The whole town walked up to the barrow field for it, which had never happened before. They took the empty box out of the open ground and burned it, cloak and feathers and all, filled the hole in, and set the stone back with the name recut. Elowen Halvard, not lost. It is still up there, and people leave bread on it, which began as a joke and has become a custom, and Nell has given up trying to stop it. Now here is what became of all of them, because you will want to know. Osric Blane was tried in Bellhaven by harbor law, in the Bell House, in front of the town, over 11 days. He was convicted of the taking, the false writ, the burning of his own bonded store, and 406 deaths by the law of consequence. Everything he owned was broken up and sold, and every crown of it went to the war widows of both coasts, wolf and crow alike, paid out over 9 years by a joint bench of 3 wolves, 3 crows, and 3 Bellhaven townspeople, which is still sitting and still paying. He was sent to the fortress at Coldgate, and he died there 14 years later of an ordinary illness, in a cell with no window on the sea. Nobody claimed the body. Nell did not go. Tam Cull turned evidence and was sentenced to 12 years on the seawall works. He served 9. When he came out, he could not stay in Bellhaven and did not try. He sends a letter to the bakery on the eve of every harvest, 1 line long, always the same 2 words, and Nell has never answered one and has never thrown one away. Master Pell paid his 9 crowns back to the widow's bench at 11 pence a week and lived to finish it. He made the new bell wheel for the widow at his own cost. Corbin Vask is Bellhaven's harbor master, the first crow ever to wear the brass chain, which caused a great deal of noise for about a month, and then stopped causing any at all, because he is extremely good at it. His wife Tilly runs the fish market. He has never once used the front door of the bakery. Warden Bess Tanner retired at 70 and refused every honor the Northmarch offered her, except one. There is a bench on the harbor front with her name on it, and she sat on it most days until the end. Mother Halla of the Rook Court lived 6 more years and saw the 9 sisters fed. The wolf ships and the crow boats work the kettle together now, under a joint fishery, and nobody under 20 in Bellhaven can remember what all the shouting was about. And Elowen Halvard, whom most of the northern coast still calls Nell, married the Alpha King of the Northmarch again, on a clear day in the spring, in the Bell House, under the widow, because she said she was not being married anywhere her town could not fit. They live in both places, and always have. The winter at Stonewatch on the headland, where she is Luna of the Northmarch, and is spoken of by wolves who have never met her in a tone that annoys her intensely. The summer in Bellhaven, in the rooms over the bakery on Cormorant Street, which is still open 6 days a week and is now run by Mrs. Trapp's granddaughter. Nell has never given up the oven. Soren has learned to shape a loaf. He is not good at it. He does it anyway, badly, at 4 in the morning, most summer mornings, in a kitchen with the door open to the fog. Aster of the Northmarch is grown now, red-haired and gray-eyed and impossible, her father's heir and her mother's daughter. The first thing she did when she came of age was ride to Coldgate and look at Osric Blane through a grate and say nothing to him at all, and come home. She holds the joint bench for the widow's payments. She counts everything. There are 2 more children. A son, Rask, who is 9, named for his mother's own name, who is afraid of the water and is being coaxed. And a daughter, Hala, who is 6, named for a small bent woman with coal-black eyes, who is afraid of absolutely nothing and has already climbed the tower stair twice. The little clay jar of gray paste that Nell worked into her wrists every morning for 10 years sits on the shelf over the bread bench in Bellhaven, empty with the lid off. She kept it on purpose. Aster asked her once why she did not throw it out. "Because I want to be able to see it," Nell said. And on the 9th day of every deep winter, the widow rings 3 long strokes over Bellhaven harbor at noon, and the whole town stops whatever it is doing and walks down to the seawall, and nobody has ever had to explain to a single child why. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Nell had 10 years to send 1 word north, and she never sent it, because a forged letter told her that the man she loved had signed her death. Was she right to stay silent and keep her daughter safe? Or did she owe Soren the truth, even if telling him cost her everything? Pick a side. You cannot say both. Let me know in the comments. I read every one. If you'd like more stories, there are plenty more on the channel. Much love, Sophie.